This has been a rapid and incomplete overview of the history of the Methodist Church over the last 3 centuries. But we now have to ask, where does that leave us in the 21st century? It leaves us, I would say, first of all, with a people called Methodist. A people who would claim to be open-hearted in their sense of community. A people who are still a significant, albeit declining, presence in rural, suburban and urban communities. The Methodist people are a people who intentionally work together as lay and ordained, whose ministers see themselves very much as alongside the laity. And that partnership of lay and ordained is very much symbolised by the presidency and vice presidency of the conference. The president is always a presbyter, the vice president a layperson or deacon. It's symbolised in the significant role that local preachers have in the worship of the Methodist Church. Most Methodist services are taken by lay people rather than by ordained ministers. And it's signified by the important role that lay people have in the governance of the church at every level: local church, circuit, district and connection. The Methodist people are a people for whom discipleship is important, who remember that the first Methodists met together in classes in order to hold one another to account for their discipleship. That call to discipleship is still symbolised by the annual ticket of membership that all Methodist members are given. Methodists are still encouraged to meet together in fellowship. Few class meetings may remain in the way that they once did, but many Methodists are involved in house groups or Bible study groups, as well as in the worship of their churches. The Methodist people, of course, have seen a vast change in their demography. Now we are a multiracial and multicultural people. I need to remember that the Methodist history that I've presented here is very much my Methodist history, the history of the Methodist Church in Britain. It might not be the history of somebody else who comes from another part of Methodism's great global presence. Leaves us secondly with worship that is called Methodist. Hymnody has always been important to Methodists. We were, we like to say, born in song, with the many thousands of verses written by Charles Wesley and the singing of those 18th century Methodists. A few years ago, we published our latest hymn book, Singing the Faith, expressing the continued importance of hymnody as core to our worship. Singing the Faith stands alongside our Methodist worship book, published in 1999. The Methodist worship is shaped both by the preaching tradition of the historic three churches, churches in which, and for Methodism in particular, this was important, the sermon had a central role in worship, and by the liturgies of the Church of England, the Holy Communion service, and morning and evening prayer. Now Methodist people will draw not only on our own Methodist resources, but on other resources such as those of Iona or Taizé in the leading of worship. As part of our worship, the circuit plan remains distinctive. The circuit plan deploying the ministry of local preachers around our churches Sunday by Sunday. And it reminds us that our worship is always shaped by a calendar. And for Methodists, that calendar combines the local and the Catholic. The local, the Harvest Festival, the Sunday School anniversary that remains very important in some places, though perhaps less so than in the early part of the 20th century. And the Catholic calendar, the lectionary that we follow week by week, and which we share with Christians of many other denominations. And Methodists will have noticed the increased use of liturgical colours in our worship, with stoles and sometimes pulpit and table falls. We have, thirdly, a faith that we call Methodist. As our 1932 Deed of Union makes clear, the Methodist people stand in the mainstream of a broadly Protestant Christianity. We proclaim that ours is an evangelical faith. That is to say that we stand as part of the inheritance of Luther and others of the Protestant Reformation, with an emphasis on the good news of Christ that is to be shared. And the particular Methodist emphasis, which it takes from John and Charles Wesley, is on our Arminianism. That is to say that the evangelical offer of grace is extended to all people. It's a faith that is considered. We have a long tradition in the Methodist Church of scholarship. Wesley, of course, encouraged all his preachers to read and to read widely. There have been many leading university professors who have been Methodists. But Methodism has encouraged scholarship all the way through, not only its ordained ministers, but also many of its local preachers, people who studied faithfully to acquire a deep knowledge of the Christian faith and of the Scriptures. And lastly, we are left with a church that we call Methodist. It has to be said that there have always been a few people who resist the notion that Methodism is a church. They would maintain that Methodism was established to be and continues to be primarily a movement. But Methodism established its ecclesial identity firmly in the 19th century. Not to be a church separate from other Christians, but to be committed to ecumenism, part of the Church Catholic. In the early 21st century, we are now a church that is in a covenant relationship with the Church of England, where both denominations are committed to overcoming the remaining obstacles to full and visible unity. The form of church that we have is connectionalism. We are a church in Britain that is governed by our conference. Although since shortly after the Second World War, we have been discussing how we might introduce episcopacy into the Methodist Church, there are no bishops in British Methodism at the moment. Conference effectively is our bishop. The conference meets annually. It consists of a presbyteral session and of a representative session bringing together presbyters, deacons and lay people. Over a period of 8 days in June or early July, it reviews the whole life of the Methodist Church, stations its ministers, and welcomes into full connection those who have been trained and prepared for ministry among us. The connection is arranged in 31 districts, each of which has its own synod. And there are something over 500 circuits. The circuits can vary enormously. Some of them are a handful of churches with 1 or 2 ministers. Others cover whole counties or a greater geographical area. We have now approximately 3,000 ordained presbyters, half of those who are supernumerary, that is to say, who have sat down from their active ministry, and about 300 deacons, again about half of them supernumerary. But as I said earlier, we remain essentially a church that believes in the partnership of the lay and the ordained, where much of our ministry is exercised through local preachers, through pastoral visitors, and through those who hold office in the various courts of the church. This Methodist Church may be very different from that which the Wesley brothers brought into being in the 18th century, but it is still recognisably its descendant.